And the administrative partner, they would put out something called Dykema Daily, just, news of the firm. So we got our very first Dykema Daily. And the very first story was that they'd done a study of phone costs and had determined that people were using the Dykema phone system for personal calls. And everybody had to come down to the administrative office and bring a check for $6 to make, and I said, what? What kind of firm is this? Of course, it was an April Fool's joke. And I didn't know, we're brand new, and it was the very first thing we got. So a year later, Brian Sullivan said to people, he said, we thought we were getting geographic expansion, but what we got was entrepreneurial infusion because all four of us were very entrepreneurial. I mean, basically, to start a firm from scratch, you eat what you kill. And many of the Dykema Gossett partners were smarter than we were, but their whole practice development was their in-basket because they were young and they were smart and they would take over from some more senior partner. So Brian realized what we brought to the firm, and later on I went on the executive committee, and ultimately Rex Schlabach was chairman of the firm. So we had a good run at in that firm, and I retired about 7 years ago. So I have no connection with the firm now.
About that time, you got involved in a campaign that was run under the slogan, D is dumb. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, one thing that's changed in the 30 or 40 years, there was a period of time when policy was driven by three big groups: business, labor, and the consumer groups. And the consumer groups were quite powerful. They had the support of the unions. And one of the issues that they would always fight about was utility rates. So the consumer groups put a ballot question on them that was to control utility rates. It would have bankrupted DTE, Consumers Power, and so on. So these groups got together and they hired, I think, probably one of the best political teams, Republicans and Democrats, to fight this campaign. They had all polling, they had Republican, Democrat, campaign managers, and they had me as their lawyer. And two things that we learned: there was a limit of $40,000 per ballot question committee. We knew we would have to spend millions. So I came up with this idea of a compliance and operations group, COG. It was not a committee, but it controlled committees. And through that model, we created hundreds of committees so that we could spend millions of dollars. I remember that.
It kind of dates back to your Rockefeller days, huh?
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's where that kind of idea came from, that you never assume that these barriers that the anti-political people are throwing up will stop you if it's important enough. Figure out a way to do it. We then did polling and said, we are going to lose. There is no way we can win on this ballot. It was just, this was going to pass. The utilities controlled the legislature. They could get the votes. So a decision was made to put another proposal on the ballot called H. And under the Constitution, if two ballot proposals cover the same thing, if they both pass and one has more votes than the other, it will take effect. So that was the strategy. We later used that same strategy in the bear hunting campaign. But we came up with this new amendment, got it adopted by the legislature, and then launched one of the most expensive campaigns in Michigan's history with one theme: D is dumb. Because there is no way you could run an ad discussing utility rates in a way that people would pay any attention to, and particularly drive their vote. But if you say 1,000,000 times, D is dumb, D is dumb, D is dumb, it sticks with enough people. And we won. We were way ahead, we felt. And then somebody figured out that we had created this cog. I had created the cog. And I'd come up with the idea, and it was operating. And they brought a complaint against us in the campaign finance. I told the utilities, I said, it's legal, I guarantee you. It's perfectly legal. But you could see the daily tracking polls. In the same way we never ran a campaign on the substance, they learned their lesson. Don't run a campaign on the substance, just beat up on the utilities. And fortunately, they brought it too late and we squeaked by with a win, and H got more votes. D is dumb and dead. What happened thereafter, the utility CEOs or the chairs of the said, well, what happened? Why did we get this complaint filed? What did you guys do wrong? I mean, they won the election because of this idea, and they turned it down. And the general counsels, I learned my lesson about general counsels of companies. They immediately, it wasn't their fault, it was my fault, and I was expendable. So I got thrown under the rug, and my friend John Peerage was hired to defend the thing. And they brought a lawsuit on the same utilities. John brought it and ultimately won, and I never wanted him to win a case any more than that, and he did, and I was right. And this limit on ballot question committee expenditures was thrown out by the Sixth Circuit, I believe. So that was the most expensive campaign. It showed examples where we had the unions, the utility unions on our side. You had business, some labor, you had Republicans and Democrats all pulling together, and those are sometimes the most fun campaigns, where you do get to work with the other side to beat up somebody that you both decide is wrong. Most of the time it's Republicans versus Democrats or business versus labor, as has been the most recent kinds of fights over right to work and that sort of thing.
Well, later there was a challenge to the $40,000 contribution limit. The U.S. Supreme Court had spoken in a case out in California, Berkeley, and so the $40,000 contribution limitation was declared unconstitutional, and now there are no contribution limits as it relates to ballot questioning campaigns. Also, about this same time, I came to you with an idea to challenge the prohibition on corporate independent expenditures, and that started the lawsuit of Michigan Chamber of Commerce versus Austin, and as you've already relayed, that went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. In fact, that case went to the Supreme Court twice. We lost the first time, but then Austin was reversed 20 years later. So isn't it good to be still alive to see
yes, it is.
that
it is.
happen?
Yeah, I remember the day we lost the case. Of course, the Solicitor General for the Attorney General had argued the other side, and we lost the case the day of his retirement party.
That was Louis Caruso.
And I said, as a professional, what a way to go out on top. This was a very important case nationally, and for him to win that on the day of his retirement must have really been satisfaction. I do remember arguing that case. One vignette, I went down there and spent almost a week just preparing. And then that morning, I wanted to be alone. So I went to the Supreme Court library, and I went way to the back, and I sat down, and there was hardly anybody in there. And I was back in the corner reading my briefs, and I looked up, and way in the other corner was Louis Caruso doing exactly the same thing. I said, now, that's a great scene. If you were doing a movie, you would show these two people getting ready for battle, both in this very ornate library, trying to get their arguments together, and we're going to be joined on the Supreme Court battlefield in an hour or so. And it was an interesting picture that I have in my head of that day. Not only, the other picture, of course, I had is the flop sweat I had as I had to stand up and argue about 5 feet away from the Chief Justice of the United States, who didn't think much of our argument at all, and we knew that. But
although William Rehnquist kind of flipped a few years later in McConnell.
Yeah. Yes, he did. That's right. But that day, we knew he was not on our side. So that was a great experience, and